Hey guys, NTVMB here, and today I'll be presenting my new game series called Scratch Adventure. It's not every day you see videos like this from me. I would also like to mention that I'm moving to Arkansas in just a few days, so I don't have much time on hand to produce videos. So the first game in the series I'm demonstrating is, well, the first game in the series. It's just called Scratch Adventure with no fancy subtitles. So the first question you may ask is, why did you make Scratch Adventure? And the reason is, up to this point, I've never got to the point where I've finished developing an adventure or RPG type game. Hell, if you go back just a few years ago, you'll see that I attempted making a walkthrough of another game of mine, Tanan World, but I never got to finish the game. In fact, with the discontinuation of the Tanan series, it's been pretty much confirmed that Tanan World won't be finished. Anyways, this game is heavily inspired by Earthbound, and the storyline definitely reflects that. By the way, you can play both of these games on the Scratch website using the link in the description. Enough talking. Let's get into the gameplay. Dang it. Alright, so we'll just create a new save file real quick. So this is chapter 1. There are 7 chapters in this game. Let's do the first level. So, okay. And in this level, you beat up a dog. So let's just do that real quick. And we leveled up. Yay. And here's the stats screen. With the first level out of the way, let's continue onward and try to explain what's going on. So, basically, there's an organism out there called Dark Scratchy, and he essentially wants to destroy the world. So it's up to Scratchy to save the world. I would show you more of the game, but I don't want to spoil the story, so let's go on to the next game. This is the second game, and if you haven't read the game's title already, this is the prequel to Scratch Adventure, and it's called Scratch Adventure Before the Darkness. I don't really need to do much more explaining, as a lot of the assets are reused from the first game. Gameplay is similar to the first game, so I don't really need to show that off. So I want to document the development process of the first game. I started development in late December 2020. It took me a few days to get everything figured out, but then things started moving pretty quickly. On New Year's Day 2021, I released the first chapter. Now, since this is the first game in the series, the routines I used for the battle engine and other things ended up being quite inefficient. Just look at the attack buttons and you'll get an idea of how inefficient the game was. Because of this, I had to separate every chapter into its own project. That would make things easier to manage anyway. Things were moving on pretty quickly, but due to siblings being dumb, the game took me an entire month to finish. Chapter 2 released a few days later, and at the same time, I also uploaded the game to GameJolt. And this is when I became aware of a few things that needed to be fixed. One thing was that the boss in Chapter 2 was too strong. That was an easy fix, though. The second thing was that there was no way to restore MP in battle. This took a bit of time to implement, but the result was the magic attack MP drain. It simply drains up to a quarter of the enemy's max MP. Yeah, it couldn't have been simpler than that. At the time of making these fixes, I had not started work on Chapter 3 yet. So this saved me from having to redo the same code in Chapter 3 and possibly create inconsistencies. And yes, I am aware that the backpack exists in Scratch, but I use the offline editor to work on my project, so I can't use the backpack. The development process of Chapter 3 wasn't very interesting, except I had to fix numerous bugs while playtesting. I did get all of them fixed, at least the ones I found, and released Chapter 3 another day later. Chapter 4 was released 3 days later, and while I was at it, I fixed some typos from previous chapters. Another bug was found, but it wasn't major and was quickly fixed by the time Chapter 5 was released. 4 days after the release of Chapter 5, Chapter 6 was released. The magic attacks added in Chapter 6 were left unimplemented for a reason I will not disclose due to spoilers. A week passed with no new announcements, but later that week, Chapter 7 was released. I had announced that the zip package containing all chapters would be released in February. Shortly after the release of Chapter 7, I had put up a poll on the GameJolt page asking if they would like to see the game bundled up in an EXE package, and unsurprisingly, the response was yes. On the 2nd of February, I released the zip package, and a few days after that, the EXE package was released. And while I was at it, I made sure to bundle Scratch Desktop in the EXE package. The final size of the game ended up to be a little less than 200 megabytes. The reason why it was so large was probably because of the music. I would say that the music contributes to at least 90% of the game's size. I had a few features I planned to add to the game, but I never got to work on any of them. 6 months went by without any new announcements on the Scratch Adventure series, but on July 10th, 2021, I announced Scratch Adventure, Before the Darkness. I was surprised how much attention the game was getting, considering that Scratch Adventure never really got much attention besides the pictures I posted showing more than 1,000 blocks of code and just 2 scripts. This time, there would only be 5 chapters because this was a prequel set in a time before things like Pico's Lab were built. On July 13th, I released the first chapter. While we're here, I'd like to discuss the improvements I made over the first game. The most notable improvement is that I made a lot more efficient routines when it comes to handling things like the battle engine. This would make things much easier to handle in the long term because I planned on combining all the chapters into one project this time. I also wanted to include a few references to some of my favorite games. Some of you are going to hate me for this, but I even threw in an Among Us reference, but it was removed shortly after the release of Chapter 2 due to being controversial. In fact, I'm going to throw out another spoiler here. At the end of Chapter 2, Giga calls Nano a pervert for his poor choice of words, although in the Scratch website it was changed to Creeper. This is a reference to Shezo in Puyo Puyo, who is often called a pervert or creeper due to his poor choice of words, particularly against Arl. At this point, I was very busy for the next 3 days after the release of Chapter 2, thus delaying the release of Chapter 3. Shortly before the release of Chapter 4, I added up all the blocks from all the sprites. I found that I had placed 4,732 blocks. Obviously, I had placed much more than that in the final game, but I'm not about to open up the game just to count the number of blocks again. While I was working on Chapter 5, I had found a few bugs that I didn't notice in previous playtesting. It was mostly just incorrect placement of set variable blocks. I also took the time to increase the amount of MP each boss had. The final boss fight took a bit of thought from me, and it helped to reference the first game to remember how I did at the multi-phase levels. So now that Chapter 5 was finished, you'd think I would be done with the game, right? Actually, I wasn't. I had planned to do a bit more with the game after finishing the main story. One of the things I did was add a hard mode. In this mode, all stats are doubled, including the amount of experience enemies give you, and there's a secret boss you can fight after completing the main story. Good luck beating it, though. To access the hard mode, you name your character Sephiroth. If it wasn't obvious enough, this is a reference to Final Fantasy VII. I also added a few Easter eggs in the game, and it appears that I really liked a certain string, as I would cover up scripts handling Easter eggs with comments that had the text Jigoku e yokoso, which means welcome to hell in Japanese. Well, this is the end of the video, so, Thank you guys for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys sometime after moving. Bye.